Let me introduce our speaker now. Today's speaker is Paul Schempp. Paul has dedicated his professional life to understanding what it takes to be an expert performer. He is president of Performance Matters Incorporated, and as a professional speaker, consultant, and coach, he brings to the table today more than 25 years of experience on the advice and counseling he gives on how to perform at a very high level or an expert level. In his academic career, Paul is a research professor and director of the Sport Instruction Research Lab at the University of Georgia. He spent over a decade conducting research into characteristics and the development of expertise. He's written 6 books, including 5 Steps to Expert, how to go from business novice to elite performer. And he has applied his research to practice, including a practice that many of you love very much, which is the practice of sport. He's designed programs to help improve the performance of professional athletes around the world. Just for a couple of examples, he's worked with the PGA, he's worked with the U.S. Track and Field Association, among many others in the United States, and certainly he's done many worldwide. But what do all these credentials really mean to us today? I think we can boil it down to 3 words. Paul is an expert on expertise. And so this morning, he's going to give us a talk about the 3 keys to expertise. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Schempp.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate that. Had you found yourself in the fall of 1972 on a small college campus in Portland, Oregon, you may have seen this young man. But you had better have introduced yourself early, because he only lasted 1 semester. He dropped out. But he was too embarrassed when he went home to his step-parents to tell them that he had left campus that he returned the next semester. But with no money, he spent most of that time sleeping on the floors of friends. He collected Coke bottles to turn in for deposits to earn food money. And then he would take weekly trips to the Hare Krishna temple simply to get a free meal. Well, that ruse wasn't going to last long, so he returned home, took a job at an electronic gaming company, because his ultimate goal was to take a spiritual journey to India. And after 2 years, he had enough money to do that. So off he went and spent 7 months visiting ashrams in India. He returned home a Buddhist with his head shaved and experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs. He was 20 years old, 1975. And if I told you after that this man was going to go on to change your life, you'd probably find that hard to believe. It's the story of Steve Jobs. And my point is this, that there's no inherent qualities that you brought into this world that actually dictate how good you can be at what you choose to do. Now, we do know there are some parameters relative to intelligence, and if you're going to be a professional athlete, relative to your physical development. But those are minor characteristics to the things that we really know to help develop expertise. In fact, research has consistently shown there are 3 things. And the good news is that every one of them is under your control. So we know this. No one is born an expert. How good you will be is determined by you. So here are the 3 characteristics, and then I'll spend a little time just talking about each. First is experience. You can't really be good at anything until you experience it. Next, takes knowledge. Most of you will probably concede that the best people in the world, the experts, really know as much as, if not more than, most people about their subject. And the third are the skills. Every one of you has a toolbox, a tool set, if you will, to do the things that you need to do. So let's take a moment and explore some of these. First of all, experience. You know, this is always something that's interesting as a college professor to talk to your students about because they don't have any. It's not until you get out, till you actually realize how important experience is. And I say that not as a disclaimer as a university professor, because I know most of you, when you graduated, you got out into the real world, you thought, they didn't teach us that at UGA, did they? No. Experience is a rich source of practical knowledge that you cannot get anywhere else. We simply can't teach experience at the university. Next, you learned what works and what doesn't work. And only again, you can get that through experience. You begin to understand your environment. Most of you are in business. How many of you are in the financial business? Yeah, many of you. I'm sure if you think about your institution that you work for, whether it's a large corporation like Wells Fargo or like Jeff, kind of a private investment firm, the culture is a bit different. And you don't understand that culture until you really have some experience in it. And then finally, it helps you develop the skills and identify the skills that will make you successful in what you do. That's the benefits of experience. All right, but here's the caveat. Experience alone does not make you an expert. Let me tell you just a brief story. Prior to coming to the University of Georgia, I spent some time at the University of Oregon. Beautiful state. One of the things that I did there is I had the opportunity to supervise student teachers. That meant people who were going to be public school teachers. They would go out and they'd do their practical experience. Well, one semester I got a phone call 2 days into the semester saying that I had to get out to this school because this student teacher just wasn't going to make it. I was shocked. And I told the other faculty. They were surprised as well because we thought, I'll use a student named Debbie, was going to be one of the best graduates we had ever had. So out I went to the school, and I walked in, and the cooperating teacher met me. He knew I was coming. He says, "You got to get her out of here." And I said, "What's the problem?" I'll call him Jim. "What's the problem, Jim?" And he said, "She just doesn't listen to me. She thinks that she knows everything there is to know." And I said, "Well, listen, why don't we just let me watch her teach, and then afterwards we'll meet," which we did. So we got into his office, and no sooner have we sat down, and he starts to say, "She just doesn't respect the experience I have. I've been teaching 25 years, and before he could finish that sentence, she said, "Wait, you taught 1 year, and you've repeated it 24 times. Ooh. My immediate thought was she was probably right. This guy was known for being a wonderful guy, great with kids, and people loved him, very reliable. But if you looked at his lessons today, you could probably turn the clock back 25 years and see the same thing. All right. So we immediately moved Debbie, and just to push that story forward, 10 years later, Debbie became the first physical education state teacher of the year in California. I mean, of all subjects. That's how good she was. All right. But the point was that he wasn't any better today than he was 25 years ago. And I'm sure most of you know people like that. They've been in the business for a lot of times. So when people say, "I've been doing this for 10 or 15 or 20 years, you know, as somebody who's studied experts, that doesn't really impress me. Because you need the experience, yes, but it doesn't make you better. And I'll give you an example in your own life. Look at your handwriting. Yeah, I see people smiling and laughing. Of course. Is it any better today than it was last week? Absolutely not. A year ago, 5 years ago? No, it's not. So experience alone doesn't make you a better handwriter. All right. So what is it that experts do with their experience that makes them great? And we've done this study through different domains, sports and other areas as well. And what we find is that at the end of critical experiences, right, whether it's a game or it's a meeting they had or a sales call, for example, what do they do? And here's this. They ask themselves 3 questions. Now, they don't all use this language, but here are the 3 questions. The first thing they say is, what did I do well? Because it's important to know what your strengths are. Because the next time you're in a similar situation, you want to bring that full ammunition in, don't you? You want to be able to know what your strengths are so when you plan strategically, you can build on those. So it's important to identify what your strengths are. Here's the next question. What could I improve? Not what was I bad at or what was poor. Don't think that way. Think, what can I improve? And again, we're talking about experts, people who are absolutely at the top of their game. And they always believe there's areas for improvement. And I'm going to guess if you think carefully about your own experiences, you can always identify something that could get better. And here's the final question. How do I improve? And if you ask yourself these 3 questions at the end of every important experience, you will get better. So what I'd like you to do right now, if you don't mind, is think about something that you've done recently. In your professional life, if you'd like to use your personal life, that's okay too. But something in your professional life. Perhaps it was a meeting or a big event that took place. And ask yourself these 3 questions. What did I do well? What could I have improved? And how could I have improved it? And then once you have those 3 answers, what I'd like you to do is turn to the person to your left or to your right and share that with them, and then listen to what they have to say. Go ahead. Take a few minutes. About another 30 seconds. Okay, if I could have your attention. I hope you found that little exercise helpful. I'm going to put somebody on the spot here. I should have cued him that I was going to do this, but we're blessed this morning to have in this room, in my opinion, one of the greatest athletes in America today. How many of you have heard of the Ironman competition? Yeah, okay. The World Championships are held in Hawaii every year. Some of you know that. What a great place for a championship. I think we ought to have this breakfast in Hawaii. Natalie, where are you? No, just kidding. All right. Well, this gentleman, who I consider a dear friend, turned 60 in October. And how he celebrated his 60th birthday was he got up early and he went for a swim in the open ocean a little over 2 miles. Immediately got out of the water, got on a bicycle, and rode through the lava fields for 112 miles. Got off the bike and then completed a full marathon, 26.2 miles. Mike, would you mind standing up? This is Mike Ween. Thank you, Mike. All right,
Somebody's supposed to yell, he doesn't look like he's 60.
That's why I had to tell him, Mike.
I'm older than him.
And one of the...
In my 3.
And I was just going to say, one of the things I love about Mike, we're dear friends, is he emails me and blogs. And every time, don't you ask yourself these questions, Mike, at the end? Not using that language, but you always say, this is what was done well, here's where I can improve, and in my training, this is what I'm going to do better, don't you? Yeah. And we find that consistently. And I'm going to guess if you talk to somebody you consider at the top of their game or the top of your game, and you ask them what they think after an important experience, that's what they'll find. And I'll also submit this to you. If you were going to take one thing out of this room this morning, this right here will probably serve you better than anything else I have to share with you. Because it's how to use your experience to make you better tomorrow than you are today. All right, a little quiz for you. I mean, I'm a university professor. I have to give you a quiz, right, Dean? I mean, it's policy, right? All right. One of the things that we ask when we do our research is we usually try to compare novices and experts so we can see what the differentiators are. Consistently, this is one of the things we usually slip into the research protocol. On a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm going to ask you this relative to yourself and your professional practice, On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being minimal to do your job, 10 being everything you could possibly ever know to do your job well, where do you rank yourself in terms of how much you know on a scale of 1 to 10? If you would, if you have a pencil, just write that down. I won't ask you to share it, but just write it down. And then I'll share with you the results of our research. Everybody have a number? All right. Here's what the novices told us. Yep, consistently. And here's what the experts told us. 4.5. Now, yeah, I know that cracked us up when we saw it too. But here's the key point. When you think you know pretty much everything there is to know, how hard do you try to learn? How many of you have had in your offices or in your organizations novices come in and think they pretty much knew everything? Yeah, I see a couple of heads shaking. But it's when you think you still have a great deal to learn, you will learn, and you will be better tomorrow. I'm preaching to the choir because that's why you're here this morning, right? I mean, other than the great breakfast. Right? But you're here to learn something new that can help you. So that's an indicator of an expert. Right? So think about that. Experts are voracious learners. They never get tired of learning something new that's going to help them to be better. So we know that first of all, they're objective. They want to know what's the biggest difference. What do I really need to know to be better at what I do? Next, what don't I know? In fact, when you hear somebody say to you, I don't know, pay attention to that person. Because that's a person that is going to learn. The person that thinks they have all the answers won't. But when somebody can be critical enough to say, I don't know, I'm going to have to find out, that's a person who's going to get better. Let me give you one quick story on that one. Sam Walton, most of you have heard of Walmart, right? Yeah. Went back in the day, I think it was late 60s, early 70s, computers were just starting to come around. I know most of us, if you teach college students, you don't want to know. I mean, most of those kids have never been in a world that didn't have, oh, by the way, I'll tell you this story. This is kind of funny. I see a slightly older crowd. I actually brought in a floppy disk. Remember when disks were floppy? They had never seen one before. And they said, oh, is that where the name comes from? Yes, that's where the name comes from, floppy disk. I've never seen that. All right, Sam Walton. Computers were just coming on. He thought, this is going to be an important trend, not just in business, but in our life. So he signed up with IBM and took courses up in Tarrytown, New York to learn how to run computers. Now, when he got back to Bentonville, Arkansas, do you think he was the one running the computers? No. But he knew enough about them. He had gone and learned enough that he now was able to implement that into Walmart. And just think about, for example, the inventory control Walmart has. It's state-of-the-art. And it started back because Walton said, I don't know this information, and I need to know. All right. I'm going to give you another little quiz here. We wanted to know what resources, if experts know all this information, where do they get it? And so these are the 5 areas we found experts identified as being most critical. And here's the question we asked, most critical to what they do on an everyday basis. And these were the 5 areas. Then we asked them to rank order. So what I'd like you to do is rank order those resources for what you do. And then I'll share with you what we found, if you don't mind. Go ahead and rank order them. And this is you. Everybody have that? Okay. Now, before I show you the results, it's important to know that there was variability. Those of you that know research, variability in this. So not every expert said exactly the same thing. And the reason the point I'm trying to make here is think about what you use to learn. Because the more you can learn from these sources, the better off you're going to be. All right. Here's what they ranked number 5, was reading. By the way, we know experts are voracious readers. They read books, they read magazines, they read anything they can get their hands on. If you really want to know if somebody is an expert, ask to see their library. And I'm going to guess, and I'm going to tell you a brief story in just a minute, I'm going to guess that they have a fairly substantial library. And most of the topics, don't really have to do with what their business is. They learn outside the field. One of the person that's actually participated in more of our studies than anybody else has been the former Florida State football coach, Bobby Bowden. And Vince Dooley, who's a friend, and most of you know who Vince is, former athletic director at the University of Georgia, former football coach at the University of Georgia. Vince helped set that up. And I came back from having visited Bowden for the first time, and Vince and I were having lunch, and I said, Vince, I was really surprised when I walked into Bowden's office. I mean, think about it, football coach. What would you expect to see in a football coach's office? Help me out here. Trophies, yeah, what else? Yeah, pictures of famous athletes, right? Yeah, footballs. One picture, and it was of his family on his desk. It looked like a small library. And I told Vince that, and Vince's comment was, Bobby can read? I swear. I said to Vince, you shouldn't talk, you're from Alabama too, buddy. But then the next question Vince asked me is, and I thought this was interesting, what's he reading? And I said, he reads mostly military histories. And Vince laughed because Vince, I don't know if you knew this, Vince just finished a master's degree in history. And he's written a book on history. He's written 3 books in the last 2 years. One on history, one on football, and anybody want to guess the third one? Gardening, absolutely. And he's most proud of his gardening book. All right, next, workshops, seminars, training. That came out 4th. What you're doing right now. The reason this came out so high is 2. One, they were able to learn from somebody they considered to be an expert, but also the networking opportunities. And I'm going to guess that's another reason you're here, is because you're with people that you can talk to and share experiences with. Next, they're clients. If you're a coach, it's your athletes. If it's teachers, your students. If you're a business person, it's your clients. You learn a great deal about your business because ultimately, that's where your success or failure is measured, isn't it? Next, peers. Critically important source of knowledge because nobody understands the challenges that you face on a daily basis better than your peers. Nobody is better able to come up with solutions to your problems than your peers are. And what do you think the last one is? Experience. And I've already told you how to leverage that. All right. I want to finish. The last area is going to be skills. 3 points I'd like to make. First of all, it's important to identify your skills that are going to increase your performance. As the dean said, I work with some professional athletes. Most of them are in golf. And I currently work with a couple of players that are on the PGA Tour, European Tour. And one of the things that we have to do is identify the skill. And I say skill because really we only have enough time to focus on one major skill that's going to make the biggest difference in your tournament next week. And let's practice that. And that's a great way to think about your own business and your own profession. What skill, and we're going to go there in just a minute, could you identify that would make you a better performer? Next, you have to be able to deliberately practice these, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And then finally, you have to self-monitor. You have to measure your progress. Are you getting any better because you've practiced this skill and developed it? If you're not, then either you're on the wrong skill or something's wrong with the practice. I understand Mark Fox was here fairly recently. Coach Fox? You don't remember Coach? I see a couple of head shakes, yeah. Coach Fox was here. If Coach Fox's team doesn't get better at the end of practice, was the practice any good? No, it wasn't. And so that's what you have to think. All right, let's talk about skills. We know this comes from research done at the University of Chicago Business School. Sorry, Dean, we're not doing it here. I don't know why. All right. And one of the things they identified as a part of the skill set for an effective CEO were these skills here. What I'd like you to do is just identify one skill that might make you a better performer in the job that you have. What if you were a better listener? What if you were a better problem solver? Would that make you better at what you do? How about a planner or a communicator, organizer, decision maker? I know you could probably say all of them, but what if you could identify just one? A few years ago, let me give you a real solid example of this. I had the opportunity, it was, sometimes you get a chance to do something that's more ceremonial than it is real, but it sounds impressive. I was the assistant coach for the English professional golf team at the World Championships. And our 2 golfers were David Howell and Luke Donald. Luke is currently ranked the #1 golfer in the world. So yes, I can honestly stand, I wish Luke was standing here because he would laugh his head off if he heard this. I actually coached the #1 golfer in the world. But we were sitting down at dinner, and I said, Lukey, if I could touch your head with a magic wand and make one skill better, what would it be? And his soon-to-be bride was sitting next to him, and he said, putting. She says, oh, I'm so glad you didn't say distance. Most golfers want to hit the ball further. Well, at that time, he was ranked like 60th in the world in putting, and he was ranked 8th in the world. Last year, he was ranked #1 in putting. He was also #1 on the money list, $6 million, because he identified the right skill that he needed to work on for his performance. But once you have that skill, what do you need to do to practice it? Well, there's 3 things. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to teach you a skill that as business professionals I think might be helpful to you. And then I'm going to show you how you can actually learn it. Would you like to learn the skill of how to pull money out of thin air? All right, I'll demonstrate it for you. First of all, you have to be able to identify where it is, then just simply reach out and grab it. Would you like to learn how to do that? Of course you would. All right. Here are the 3 phases in learning the skill, and we'll actually go through it. I'll teach you how to do it. First, you have to understand how to do it. You just saw it. If I said to you, go ahead and practice that, what would you do? You wouldn't know. It's the same with any other skill in your business. First, you have to understand. And then you have to have what we call deliberate practice. You have to practice and attempt to get better. Just because you repeat something doesn't mean it's practice. Your handwriting is not practice. You have to intentionally try to improve your handwriting if you're going to improve it. Well, we're going to practice a little bit this morning. And then finally you get to the 3rd stage, and that's execution. And here's the difference between practice and execution. In practice, we focus on the mechanics, the technique, how it's done. By the time you get to execution, you're thinking about the purpose of the skill, and you're using it to good effect. Let me give you one example, and then I'll teach you the skill of pulling money out of thin air. Walking. When you were first learning, and I noticed everybody in this room knows how to walk. When you were first learning, you tried to understand it. So what kinds of things did you do to try to understand this thing called walking? Yeah, you'd watch other people. Right? And then you'd try it, and it wasn't so safe. You'd practice it, and you'd begin to learn things like, well, if I hold on to something, my balance is a little better. And as long as you hold on to something, your balance was improving slightly, wasn't it? So you were deliberately practicing. Then you'd take a step. And then maybe you'd get some coaching. Somebody'd come over, and you'd grab their hands, and you'd start to walk. You practiced. When was the last time you practiced walking? Don't answer that question. But now you walk, and you're not thinking about things like balance. You're not thinking about, right hand, left foot, right? You're thinking about the purpose. I'm walking from here to the parking garage. And again, the purpose. How quickly do you need to be there? Are you running late, so you might walk a little faster? Or you're talking with somebody, so you're walking a little slower. So you're thinking about the purpose of the skill, not the skill itself. And that's how we learn skills, and that's how they make a difference in performance. All right, as promised, let's go through this. If you have a quarter, would you pull it out? If you don't have a quarter, would you ask somebody at the table to borrow one? And I know a lot of you were in finance, so there may be some contracts coming out on this table. What's the current interest rate? Yes, you will impress your kids with this. All right. Understand, first thing you have to know how this skill is done, right? You have to know how to make the money come out of thin air. Understanding. There's 4 steps to it. Right? And when I give you the first one, I'm going to see a lot of aha faces. Take the quarter or the coin and hold it between your thumb and your forefinger. Just like that. Hold it between your thumb and your forefinger. Sometimes you need a bigger coin. All right, next, that's number 1. Number 2 is just put it out to the side. And by the way, if you flip your fingers a little bit, it convinces people that your hand is actually empty. Little magician's trick. All right. Here's the hard part, number 3. What you're going to do is cup your fingers a little bit and then you're going to throw the coin into your hand. All right? Just watch first. Watch first. Let's not practice. Watch first. Cup your hand. Release it into your hand. All right? Watch again. Cup your hand. Release it into your hand. There you go. Isn't that great? Yeah. See? Practice. All right? And then the final step is just pinch the coin with your forefinger and your thumb. So 4 steps. Grip, hold, flip, pinch. Grip, hold, flip, pinch. All right. Yeah, there's probably some clever acronym. I didn't think of one. I probably could have used Terry College or something like that. Now, the more you practice this, all right, and I don't recommend doing it while you're driving, but the more you practice this, the easier it's going to be. So when you stand up in front of somebody, you're going to say, would you like to learn how to pull money out of thin air? Watch. Wow, how did you do that? All right, we also have I invited another guest here this morning, and this is a person who I'm very proud to say is also a dear friend, and he served our country greatly. He has flown 65 combat missions as a fighter pilot for the United States Air Force. Rob, would you stand up? Rob Walden. Now, Rob, we talked a little bit earlier. Would you say that your skills as a fighter pilot was essential to your survival? Absolutely. Did you take time to understand what you needed to do? Did you practice them at all? Yeah, and then when you were in combat, did you have to think about those skills, or did they come automatically? Came automatically, yeah, and that's why you're here today, isn't it? Yeah. The guys who didn't practice quite as well? Yeah, okay. Fighter Pilot 101, there you go. All right. But thank you, yeah, for both being here and your service to our country. Really appreciate it. Yeah. By the way, some of you have probably heard, you've met 2 of my dear friends, that if you surround yourself with greatness, you will be great. Evidence suggests that's not the case. All right, what do you need to be an expert? 3 things. Again, they're completely under your control. First of all, you have to gain and use your experience. Next, you have to increase your knowledge. Look at those sources. What do you need to know that's going to make you better at what you do? And then finally, you have to develop the skills so you can use that knowledge in those experiences to be a top performer. Again, that is completely under your control. Let me finish with this, a little poem that I like from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. After all, I am a professor. We have to have some aesthetic side to us. All right? The heights by great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night. Thank you for your attention. We have time for questions? We have time for questions?
We've got time for a few. We've got a pretty big room here, and we're also creating a podcast of this. We're recording it. So please, if you've got a question, hold your hand up. We'll get a microphone to you, and then everybody will be able to hear your question, including those who watch the podcast later.
Podcasts, who developed that? Now you know. Yeah, questions, please, Mike.
It's my opportunity to get even.
All right.
I'm sure a lot of us have been watching what's happening in New York basketball. And a kid kid from Harvard
right.
who, from your perspective, how does that happen? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, first of all, you have to realize that kid's been playing basketball for years and years and years. It didn't just happen. What really has happened, he's been put in a situation where he could be successful. He brought those skills with him. They didn't automatically develop. He brought that knowledge with him. It didn't automatically develop. What's changed is the experience and the setting that he's in that's allowed him to do that. Now, with that said, how long is it going to last? We don't know. Things could change. You just don't know in sports. I mean, I look at somebody like Tiger Woods, who at one time was at the top of the field and is now kind of struggling. But I'll tell you this, and by the way, Mike does have a son that's going to Harvard, so I think he had to pitch that. But The fact that this kid is the first kid ever to come out of Harvard and play in the NBA, I think is remarkable. That he's Taiwanese is remarkable. There aren't that many Asian Americans that are playing in the NBA. So when you look at all of those things that are coalescing, yeah, it is a remarkable experience. Now, with that said, what I study is the trend to make somebody an expert. Sometimes things do happen that is difficult to explain why somebody's really good. But I hope that kid keeps going. That's a great question, though.
You know, just a follow-up, any thoughts on how, you know, a number of coaches saw him and did not see the talent?
Yeah. Well, talent's an interesting thing. I don't personally believe in talent, and I'll tell you why. Because it means different things to different people. You can't measure it. You can't measure potential. You just can't. His skill sets, you just don't know what they're going to be like in an actual competition. It's not till you actually experience it that you know if that knowledge and those skills can really work for you. And that's what he was lacking. Nobody had seen him play before. Nobody had given him a chance. Then when he got it, he blossomed. So that's a good point. Other questions? Yeah, sir.
You talked about coaching some of the PGA players.
Right.
And golf swing looks pretty simple when you just look at it, but it's a lot of mental aspects to it also. What are some of the steps you use to get the golfers over some of those mental blocks?
Great question. And a true story. Actually, all the stories I've told you are true. Let's go back to Luke Donald, #1 player in the world. At the time that I was his coach down in Barbados, another plus to doing that job, his brother Christian was caddying for him. And Christian was a former golf professional, teaching professional. So Christian spent all morning long kind of going over his swing, his grip, and this and that. You know, he's not allowed to hold the club, but he was doing this. So I looked at Luke, he was hitting golf balls, and I said, do you think as much about your swing as Christian does? And Luke turned to me, he goes, if I thought as much about my swing as he does, I'd be a caddy. Sometimes I think we overthink things. I mean, again, let's look at walking. How much do you have to do a biomechanical analysis if you walk to be able to do it? I think people really overrate that. I also look at a lot of instructors, and I know we have some faculty members in here, that we overteach things. It's usually not that hard. We have to get down to the things that are simplest. Jeff and I were having this conversation relative to behavior with his clients, right, Jeff? And they just have to take the action. It's not that hard to do, is it? Do people complicate the financial investment field? Yeah, absolutely. So you can see the same trend. That's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Did I answer it the way you were looking for? Yeah. Yeah, ma'am?
I noticed on your sources you didn't have mentors listed.
Right.
What are your thoughts on mentors, and why do you think there's not one of those sources?
Boy, it's interesting you're saying that because the next series of studies we're doing is on mentoring relationships. Yep, is on mentoring relationships. The reason it didn't come out, and that's a good question, the reason it didn't come out with the experts is because these are the people that are top of their field. They have at least 10 or 15 years. If we turned the clock back and said, what was important back to you 20 years ago, I bet mentors would be in there. In fact, we know that for a fact, and that's why we're going to actually do that study. So that's a great question. Most of the people that we studied had great mentoring. Not all, but most. So good question. Yeah, sir.
Obviously it's performance matters, so taking your and improving on skills. But I guess I'm curious. You understand that you don't do something well, and so there are a lot of things, and I'm beginning to believe that more to play to your strengths and not to fight and try to improve something that you've identified as a weakness. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I disagree with that, and I know I run counter to some people that are saying play to your strengths. Who is it? Is it Marcus Buckingham that's saying that? Yeah. Because I think you need to know what's going to make you successful in your performance. And in some cases, when it's an organization, it means bringing somebody in who can do those skills for you that you don't have. But when it's your own performance, then you can't. There's no way that you can kind of play to your strengths. Let me give you an example. I do a lot of lecturing. I do professional speaking. If I wasn't a clear communicator, I couldn't leverage more of my knowledge of the subject to make an interesting presentation. I've got to be a better communicator. And so I don't agree with that. I really think that you have to, if they aren't going to be strengths, at least they can't be liabilities. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How do psychological factors in this kind of performance theory fit in, like the GIPS in golf? Or?
Yeah, actually, the theories that we use in doing this research are all psychological, primarily cognitive psych. What we try to do is understand how people think and how they make decisions and solve problems. One of the things we don't do, and again, Jeff and I were talking about this, was motivation. We know that experts bring the motivation to the table. They don't need to, quote unquote, be motivated. But yeah, decision making, psychological thinking, that's something that we strongly look for. Was that what you were looking for, or did I not answer the question?
If there's a psychological problem, like I mentioned, there's GIPS in golf, how do you tackle that?
Yips and golf. You obviously, yeah, no. You obviously know something about golf. With that particular instance, and every situation is a little bit different, what that instance is about is trying to get people to think about something and not think about other things. Oftentimes, people will think about things that they cannot control, and they fixate on those to the point that it debilitates them for doing something else. So I try to work with them so they just think about the things they need to focus on and not focus on the things that are out of their control. And that's generally how it works. And are we having success with it? It takes a while. In fact, I had a player that came to me last year, and that was his problem. He had actually been a great putter all his life, never thought that. In fact, we were at what we call the British Open Championship. Over there, they call it the Open Championship. And he was on Saturday playing with Tiger Woods. I mean, he's a very accomplished player. And he was actually leading the tournament in putting. And Sunday morning, we were having breakfast Sunday morning, which is great because it means he's had a late tee time, which means his